Okay, so today we are joined by Varun Vidyarthi, who's going to just take us a run through the 8 steps in action around the world. What does it look like? And this is about the 8 steps model that he has run for over 35 years in Manavodaya. So Varun, these issues are relevant to all cultures, but may bring up different perspectives and issues depending on the person and on the community. So today we're going to explore your experiences and reflect on the differences of this approach around the world. So the first issue is about self-reflection. So I guess in a world moving at a fast pace, it can be hard to get a perspective on what you can control and influence. And increasingly we're aware of how we're affected by messages from others about how we should behave and what success looks like. And by practicing our focus on our patterns of behavior, we become much more aware of our blind spots and become better prepared to take control of our direction. So thinking about some examples of practical change and into individuals' thinking and individual behavior, how has this been affected by the self-reflection step?
I would like to respond to this question by saying that self-reflection per se, in my opinion, has not been enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating an environment in which a person is enabled to think deeply. Because we cannot force a person to reflect, or we cannot force an opinion. Mm-hmm. But to create that environment, we have been experimenting with different ways. And one of the best we found was early morning, some meditation, and then kind of enabling people to start talking without any agenda as such. And initially, we saw that people were a bit sarcastic. They thought that it is all artificial. But very soon when they relaxed and it became a relaxed discussion, people got into the mood and people really started reflecting, and that's when things happened. So what I'm trying to say is that the first step in any process of having an organized reflection or enabling people to reflect is to create the right setting. And that could be different for different cultures.
Yes.
In India, it starts by singing of prayers. In the Western context, we found it useful to start with meditation. And I know that in some cultures, like in Africa, people beat drums for relaxing and so on. Mm-hmm. But that's one point. Mm-hmm. Reflection per se has to be facilitated also. We find that, at least in the Indian context, it was useful to discuss or challenge people by stating certain, well-known positions that people had, like Gandhi or Buddha or Abraham Lincoln, and then ask them to reflect on those positions. Usually people first have it is tight-lipped, but when one or two open up, mm-hmm. and this is best done by starting with one's own story of how I looked at the whole issue and how I failed to look at it properly. That's when people start looking at it from their perspective. And then the whole thing snowballs. Everyone wants to speak something. And I think this initial point is very important for the facilitator to pick up. So how to enable people to come into that mood where they speak up their own mind. They don't try to project something that they want themselves to be shown as, but to really come up with their original thoughts.
Right. I'm just thinking that kind of honesty and that space is something that's very much missing in the world. The pace,
absolutely,
and
absolutely, absolutely.
People's feelings of safety to be able to explore what's inner rather than the superficial.
Yes. But let me say, I think this is very much affected also by enabling our group, because we always have these residential retreats. So mm-hmm. people are free from their regular, mundane official routine. So, and it's a residential thing, so that there's a lot of discussion beyond our formal session also. A lot of, real uh, heavy discussion among people, heavy discussion. That counts a lot. Enabling people to talk about the issues that they raised in the formal session. There's a lot of informal time available for them to talk about it. And that makes a huge difference. Because once a certain issue is raised, they put in a certain position, they go back and talk with their friends, and maybe the next day they come up with some other idea and so on. So that's another thing, to provide space for their own discussion with their own peers or friends and so on. And that also has to be designed in some manner. So reflection part is something that needs proper creation of an environment. And that is how do we make that happen?
Yes.
The second thing, of course, that we felt we were able to do it well, was to enable them to interact directly with the community. So it was not just a secluded reflection. We had organized all our programs in a way that we always went to connect with the community also. And these were very poor people. And this was not an artificial connection. We enabled people to mingle with them as they like. So anyone can go anywhere, sit with any person, talk about anything and so on. So it was not a directed kind of interaction. You see, many times when we connect with communities, it's a very organized kind of thing. Okay, you ask this question, somebody will answer that and so on. It's a very organized kind of thing. But we enable that process also to be very unorganized. So anyone can go and ask anyone any question. So people feel comfortable in putting up all kinds of kind of challenging questions to the community also. And usually, because the community has been through such an experience, they come up with brilliant answers. In fact, better than the answer that we are sometimes able to give. So that also makes a very good impact on the minds of people. They really start believing and thinking that this is something that is actually happening on ground. It is not something abstract. It is not a vague thought or some kind of a nice talk given by somebody. It's something that is actually happening on ground. And that helps the person to reflect on their own positions also very strongly.
Yes. So
there's a third component. But you can ask a question before I.
Yes, no, it was just to say that's not really the experience of a lot of change management in terms of really genuinely listening to the community. Communities, yes, particularly disadvantaged communities, are very much used to being, people come with answers, they come with solutions. And so
yes,
are fed up of being told, after somebody else has decided what the problem is. So you found
yes,
very much that if you give people the space, the people
yes,
will come with their own answers.
Now, this also has to be properly designed in a way. Now, the design part is that we first, go to the community and tell them that there are some friends coming. They don't expect anything from you. I don't think we should expect anything from them. We will learn from each other. And that is the purpose of such a visit. So this is very important. So that community should come there feeling happy, feeling that, yes, they are there to teach somebody also, share their own experience, learn from them. This is something that does not usually happen. I've been to many other organizations and their visits, and everything seems to be kind of very formally structured. Even the discussion with the community, that becomes very artificial. And the community is expecting something, the people from outside are expecting something else. So it becomes very hodgepodge. To be able to do it in a very real manner, in a very comfortable manner, in a very enjoyable manner, is something that we need to properly design right in the beginning. So that's another aspect of reflection. It helps people then to reflect that this was real. It was not something projected or some artificial engagement. It was something real that they went through.
Yes.
The third aspect which I feel where reflection takes place in a meaningful manner is about the facilitator, the person facilitating the whole reflection or dialogue or sharing of experience. Now, in this case, usually this responsibility is on me.
Mhm.
And when I share my story, because that's usually it has to be done because people would like to know who the person is. Whenever we start a program, most people don't know anything about me. So usually one does have to give an introduction. And my introduction, because it has been through a lengthy process of almost 40 years, I try to compress it in at least 5 minutes. But even those 5 minutes tend to be quite heavy in the sense that the whole life has been through a series of flip-flops, a series of failures, a series of challenges, a series of you can say real difficult times in life. When people see this or view this aspect, and they see it against the fact that I am coming from a very learned background, from a very high quality education, and I had given up my luxurious lifestyle and jobs, and I had abandoned that kind of a comfortable lifestyle. They it's obvious for any person that that itself affects the person to a great deal. And many people have told me towards the middle of a program that we feel so happy just being with you because you have been through such a huge experience. You've, you have changed the lives of so many people that we feel happy just being with you. We are happy just being here. That also helps people in reflecting back upon their lives. See,
Mhm.
one has to lead by example, really. That's what I mean. It is
Mhm.
not something to be, like the modern day motivational speakers. I mean, they are there only for that period. Nobody knows about their real life, the challenges, So what I
Yeah.
mean to say is the real change or reflection, the genuine reflection comes with all these three mixed together in some sort of, relaxed style.
Yes,
And that
you've got integrity, the integrity of all the parts all lined up, and
absolutely.
each interacts with another part, and that you can't be. And I guess as we go through the 8 steps, there'll be more examples of that as we go through, because each one relies on a change in another part of your life as well. Because if you try and change one part whilst not keeping up with
Yes.
a change in another part in your life, then obviously things are out of balance.
And the results are amazing. I mean, you asked me, how does it affect?
Yes.
The results are simply amazing because, for example, I remember about 25 years back, there was a leader of a social organization, senior leader, and on the 5th day, he suddenly gets up suddenly. The whole group is there, and he suddenly gets up and stands up and says, "Sir, I want to say something." I said, "Yes, please go ahead." I have been leading a very artificial life, he says. I've been trying to project myself as something huge, wonderful man. I'm going to save the earth and so on. And I now feel that I should give up all that nonsense. I should be humble. I should try and do something genuine. And I'm putting my foot down that from today on, no more of projection of myself. I will be genuine. Suddenly this happens, and before the whole crowd, and the whole crowd is stunned. Now, what I mean to say is that there is something going on behind the minds of people, and sometimes they say it out, sometimes they don't. But what I feel is that what they do say, sometimes in writing, sometimes in verbal, it produces tears in our eyes, because people say that, I have been thinking that life will always be nonsense, but now I realize that I have to change, and then life will be better towards me. They realize the essence of being the change,
Mhm.
because that is our core message, that we cannot understand others, we cannot understand life unless we start believing that we need to change from ourselves first. And when that message goes, we feel so happy, because that is the real whole idea. Once a person is willing to change, that's what makes the difference. And that is our, that is the real key. And we feel that this has really happened, this can happen, and we have to somehow find ways in which we make this happen.
Yes. So thinking about when you move on from self-reflection to collective reflection, and you've talked a bit about the attitude of going to the communities with with an open agenda, without
Yes.
without any inequalities of power, truly listening, and truly engaging with people. Is there any other features of potential facilitators that you and key attributes you're looking for?
You see, what you just said is something very difficult to find. Most facilitators, at least in Indian context, I'm sure it applies elsewhere also, tend to have a very clear bias towards things, tend to have a lot of prejudices.
Mm-hmm.
In Indian context, it is relating to caste. It is sometimes relating to their education. For example, if I'm a postgraduate degree holder,
Mm-hmm.
then I will feel that these are poor guys that don't know anything. I'm going to tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these kind of biases, these kind of prejudices, believe me, they are the biggest stumbling blocks to any facilitation.
Yes.
And unless we are willing to de-learn, unless we are willing to become very humble, and this does not happen, believe me, does not happen. How can we have a facilitator who's open-minded? It's a big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
The people are not open-minded, whether it is to do with just to gender openness, or whether it has to do with racial or ethnic openness.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to find. So therefore, what we have to do is to gradually train a person
Mm-hmm.
into being open
Mm-hmm.
as a facilitator, to accept everything, whatever comes. We accept it. We accept it because we also want to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
Life is for learning. So this is what our essence of connection to facilitators is. Initially, to see that they're at least willing to learn from stuff rather than say that I know.
Yes.
And then be very humble and connect to people again at their level, again to learn from them, even if they're very poor. You see, what happened was, once we were formally training these young facilitators in our diploma course, and these were all postgraduates, graduates, and so on. And they were not willing to go and live in a village. Living in a village, it's not easy because you don't have proper drinking water, you don't have proper sleeping cots, you don't have right kind of food. There's no bathroom, there's no toilet, there's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, especially to live with a poor person, it's not about living in a village and then living in a house there, but to live with a poor villager.
Mm-hmm.
So I then told them, look, in my life, when I started work, I had gone around the world. By the time I started living in a village, I was a professor, I was living everywhere, and I abandoned everything and I started living with a very poor family, and I lived there for 18 months. But how could I live it? Because I wanted to learn every bit of my time. I was trying to look at everything, the hut, the way they're living, the way they're eating, they're bathing. So everything was an experiment to see how is life. We all have to, understand life. We have to respect life. And that is how we respect people. And that is how we learn really about life. Because this is something that we have to learn in any case. Whether you become a big person in the future, this part of life will always be with you, because you will be living the real world. You will be having the essence of the real world. So don't miss this opportunity. And this is when we share such an example, people said, okay, I understand now. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to live with them. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to see how difficult life is. Yes. Now, the point is, this openness of mind is what is the basic essence of connecting with people. And we have to find ways in which the facilitator goes in an open mind. And it's not easy, but we have to find ways in which we can make it happen. Openness of mind. That is the basic essential thing. Nothing else matters.
That's really interesting, because it is something that I've viewed in a lot of. There's been a lot of programs that profess to support change, but they're very rigid. They're already predetermined. They decide,
Yes.
Success looks like X, Y, and Z. And if you try and bring in the community and their ideas, quite often people get annoyed because we've already agreed that we're going to be doing this, but they've agreed without the community, and that sense of disconnect between people's lived experience and this presumed expertise and all the strategic aims of organizations. It is, as you say, it's a poor fit, because there's just not that equality there, is there? So if we're thinking about the next of the 8 steps is income sharing. So it's an uncomfortable truth that many societies that there's it's not always just about a lack of resources. It's as much about the imbalance, which seems to be increasing in so many societies between the poor and the rich. And so I'm just wondering whether there's some specific things that you think you can give examples of where people felt they had more control of the money in their communities, and how this has changed their life and their view on their ability to change their lives.
I think you've raised a very fundamental question here that many people from the so-called social sector do not understand. When people have control over their money, only then they have control over their lives. What is happening in the case of a poor family? A poor family, just to give an example, has maybe borrowed from a moneylender an X amount of money, let's say just 10 pounds or something of that, even less. But the interest that a person is paying on that over time makes that money grow very fast, that loan grow very fast, to the extent that the person can hardly pay it back. Mm-hmm. And then they lose their assets in the process. Now, this whole burden on the head that I have to pay back this X amount, makes this person really terrible in terms of having no control over oneself. That's when people used to become bonded laborers. They used to just continue to work. Therefore, this whole ability to lead an independent, free life is all connecting to one's own resources and money in a way. So that is the one thing. That is at the individual level. But at the community level, you see, what happens is when people are working in a group, all the phenomena of change has to come through groups, because as an individual, I don't matter. Now, I have not seen this happening in societies and so much in your countries, because the expert is going and working with one person, and a group is usually not a norm. But somehow we find, I think there has to be some way in which we are able to create groups. In any case, when we are working with a group, people within a group don't trust each other also. It's very common. When it comes to money, they're always distrusting each other. So it's very essential that we create systems through which people trust each other with their own money. Now, therefore, what we created first of all, as when we started working with people, our first invention was to create some kind of a cash box managed by people themselves, where the community pooled money would be kept, and the cash box would have a lock and key. So some person from the group would keep the cash box, somebody else would keep the key, and the third person would keep the accounts. So only when all the three came together would the cash box be opened. So people could trust that their money is safe. So the arrangement of keeping money. Now there's a big flaw here. Traditionally, people used to give the money to someone who is having a shop, or who's better off, or who's a bit learned or educated. They would keep the money with that person and feel that money is safe. And it was just the other way around. A person having a shop would always use the money for the shop. A person who is a little better off will always use their money. But when we told them that, look, this is the wrong way of doing it. So traditions are not usually right, you see, and people believe that they are right. So we have to break the traditions, tell them that, look, let us create our own system. And then we design it in a way that money is available, open to them only during the meeting or when we want it. So that was one thing. The second innovation that was needed was that people were usually semi-literate or literate. They could not keep the records or the accounts. Now, how does a group trust a process, their own process, where the accounting system is totally free? Nobody knows where the money has gone. There's no proper records or so on. This was very central, and I believe still will be central to every community throughout the world. We have to find ways in which accounting systems are developed and managed by people themselves. They must know, they must be handling the cash. They must feel that this is their own cash box, this is their own accounting system. We have to train our facilitators to write their accounts and also to tell them that, look, I am writing this amount, this is amount in the bank, this money came from that woman, this has been kept, this has been given to that. So while they write the accounts, they actually they verbally tell everybody that this is what is written in the accounts. Mm-hmm. This produces the trust. Mm-hmm. Therefore, what I'm trying to say is that this control over money and ways in which people feel that they have control over money is very central to the process of being together, feeling together, doing together. Yeah. And it's very central. And we have to therefore design that way. The another aspect is gender here. Usually men, control the money. And therefore, women have no control over the money. So what we've gradually done, you see, what happens is that in a self-help group, women had to steal from their husband's pockets sometimes to deposit their monthly, because they had they didn't have access to cash at all. Now, so after the groups were formed, after they started saving the money and keep having their own cash box and their own dealings, they were dealing with cash. That is what really empowered them. That is what gave them the new freedom from their men also. Because now their men were coming to them, asking them for cash because they wanted to buy some kind of asset. So the men are now approaching the women for their cash. The women would take a loan from their group. This reversed the whole, context of life itself, the whole control over life, the feeling of joy. It all came from control over a simple thing like cash in the household. Mm-hmm. So this is again something that a self-help group is able to manage, which these poverty dealers, these development managers or whoever, they don't understand. They're simply giving out money, not able to understand that unless the community manages its own money, they will not really feel independent and having charge of their lives.
Yes.
So it's a very central question that you asked.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just taking it across into a Western context and trying to see think about how other cultures might approach this. I would say that in a lot of ways, we don't have as well developed a sense of community as probably as you have in India. So there's much more of a sense of I must solve my own problems individually, and I won't talk to other people about it. And during some of the discussions we've had already, there's been an indication that people will struggle to get together and trust one another. However, we have got things like credit unions, which are based on some of the similar principles, where a group of people come together and don't exploit one another. So I think if we can help people to understand some of that versus the payday lenders, which we've had a real problem with over here, which despite the credit unions, which are much more cost effective being maybe available, the pride sometimes for people is, I don't want to go to somebody and have people asking me questions, so I'm just going to go to this money day lender. I can get a quick decision. It's all about speed. And then they spend, 4, 5, 6 times the amount of money that they needed to do. So some of it's about pride, isn't it? That people being...
But then let us see it in another context. See, I was once invited to a county in Norway, mm-hmm. where they were not able to deal with, collective decision making. And I'm talking of Norway now. Mm-hmm. So this was a community where there were a lot of immigrants. So people from different countries, from different languages, different cultures, but living together, because they were in one place. And they could not arrive at a method through which all of them could sit together and take decisions. So here, the principle of self-help was that people who are able to have a voice among themselves, feel comfortable among themselves, they should form their own group. So what I suggested that, okay, if this immigrant group feels comfortable talking to each other, we form their group. Somebody else, thinks they are comfortable themselves, we form their group. Now, the democratic idea that we have in the head that we should all put them together, that is what democracy is all about, it doesn't work. It is to enable people to first start speaking within their group. Mm-hmm. when we did that, at least the poor person, the less advantaged persons started speaking, because otherwise they would not speak. In a large group where there are people from different backgrounds, a poor person would simply keep quiet. So once they started speaking, now this is the beauty of the self-help process. When we put together all these different groups, after they had started speaking among themselves, when we bring them together, then they're all able to speak to each other.
Yes.
See, the whole idea is to break that silence, break that fear.
Yes.
And that is a process that can be broken only when people are among their own feeling of comfort in their own zone.
Yes, we have to take.
Later, when they come out of that comfort zone, then they can speak to each other. This is something that I saw missing even in the Western context. They try and put everyone together, saying that they should be all together. That is what we think.
Yes, that's another example of people deciding the pace and the method, rather than taking the lead from the people to say, we're going to decide to pay attention to what you need and do things at your pace. I always like the quote from Stephen Covey about, most people, listen with the intent to reply rather than to understand, because I think that
I saw your quote there.
Yes, I quite like that, because I think that implies that prejudgment of, I already know what the answer is, and I'm just waiting for you to say your bit so that I can say my bit, rather than really saying, well, let's take each step from your perspective. Let's make you comfortable. Let's show. One of the other bits that I've noticed when I've been in situations with change, is that after that initial sharing, if you can prove that you've reflected back to the person and you're going to do something with it and treat it with the same respect as the person who's got power or influence, then that's, quite often people who folk have said, oh, you'll never get them on board. It's just because they can see they're being treated with integrity, and that it really matters, and it's going to make a difference to the process. Because so often people don't, do they? They've been paid lip service to.
Yes.
So, okay. So probably what we'll do is this last one, and then take a break, is that the last one, which should take us to halfway through the 8 steps, is time sharing. So thinking about, we've just talked about sharing financial resources, but I guess we've also been thinking that part of this is about sharing time and skills. Can you give us some examples of what have been gained by time sharing?
See, this is, you can say it is all about volunteering in a way. See, traditionally, most communities have this concept of volunteering with each other, because when they have to, when they make a hut, for example, and when they lay the roof, everybody has to come together, and only then they can raise it, because 2 or 3 persons cannot raise it. It has to be a dozen or more. So that's just an example to say that at the local level, people have to come together for many things, like planting of rice. So unless there are 10 or 12 women, 1 or 2 women will, they get bored, they'll not be able to do the whole field. But then 10 or 12 come together, they start singing, and everything goes well. Now, traditionally, this sharing of time and resources was part of a community living, but that has totally disintegrated now, with the families living in cities and separately in flats, and so time sharing, that has also stuck with students. So volunteering has lost its charm. People always tend to be a little selfish in that sense, that why should I do that, and so on. So at least in India, we have been trying to promote the idea of just volunteering, again, for sake of learning about life, learning about how things happen, connecting to peers. So time sharing as a selfish concept of learning, beyond what we do it in school or in college, because that's how we learn from people's experience. So that is one aspect. We have been trying to promote that in India, and it is not easy at all. We are still working on it.
Mhm.
But the concept of ashram, in ashram in India, there is something called an ashram. Ashram means there's a guru or some leader there, and people would go and serve there. Like if you see a Sikh temple, people go there and clean. They clean the floor of a Sikh Gurudwara. It's like a temple. So people will go and do free service, cleaning all the dishes and cleaning, scrubbing the floor. So that has been some kind of a tradition again. But this has been falling back. This has not been happening in recent past, with more of commercialization coming in all societies. Volunteering is going for a toss. So the idea of telling about volunteering is that we have to gradually enable the youth and others also to feel that by connecting to people without any expectation, gives real joy in a way, and one has to experience it to believe it. Because when we do something and not expect anything in return, then we really feel the joy of living, of connecting, of feeling that we are all one. Unless we share time, we will not feel one, because we always will be feeling as strangers. But there's a deeper aspect. When we share time, we in a way share consciousness. We are able to understand the thought process of the other person. They are able to understand our ways of living, thinking, working. And that is so crucial for humanity to evolve. We cannot evolve unless we come closer to each other in terms of our daily activities, in terms of the way we think, the way we do things. We are all too separated, and if we remain separated, how can we come together unless it is without any expectation? If we come together with an expectation that, okay, I'm doing this, so next time you have to do this, that is very commercial. That is not volunteering. So I still dream of such a thing happening, because this is more of a dream. Although there are time sharing, modules being put up in the West, and people are able to do that, but I see that too mechanical. I think it should come from the heart. It should come in the way that we feel a sense of joy, rather than a feeling of mechanical. I have done that much, so I must get this much in return. So that to equate it to mathematics is not done.
No, that's interesting. So there obviously are, just as you've kind of alluded to there's the time bank model where it is a transactional model. You do something for me, and somebody else will do something for me back. Or there's also but in terms of how folk view volunteering, sometimes people view volunteering as the more fortunate person doing something for the person who's less fortunate. So it's still not that mutual thing that you've described. It's the person with, it doesn't empower necessarily the person. It still creates that illusion of the haves and the have-nots. So I think what you're describing is much more about a sense of community and doing things together, rather than any differential of power, that we're all equals and we're all solving things, in conjunction with one another.
And it does not happen easily. You see, that is why I'm saying, for me, it is still an ideal that we have to we look towards. It does happen when there is a sound leadership. Again, that sound leadership has to lead by example. Now, let me give you an example. When we are running an organization, for example, like even our organization, it's a big kind of a place, lots of stuff to be done. Now, when it comes to cleaning, brooming, the dirty work, everybody wants somebody else to do it. So if there's a group of guests which have come in, and there are a lot of plates and dishes to be washed, and somebody else will do it. Now, I've seen that even in the West. I always take a round to the kitchen and then to the dishes, and to see who's doing the dishes. And I find that very few people, there are some ladies which are very good-hearted. They would always do it. Leaving them aside, because I'm sure you must have noticed that there are some women who just do it because without any expectation. They feel that it is their job to help out and so on. But if you leave out the small group like that, everybody looks down that kind of work, looks down upon that. So how to gradually enable people to see life as a whole, to be able to do things and enjoy it, and sometimes also to do it together, is a dream. I still feel that this has to happen, because that's what will connect people, bring them closer together. But I'm sure that this community living is a fact that is better managed by poorer people than with the richer people.
Yes, we are used to, we are much used to seeing things as services and entitlement, and we'll sometimes try and keep going, even when even asking for help could make life easier. There's that pride. People still driving around, one person in a car won't ask for a lift from somebody else because, you know, even though they can't afford the petrol, you know, it's that kind of, some of that stuff about, if I can't manage it my own, then it's just not possible. People don't often think more widely about how could I engage with the wider community? How could I ask for help? It's interesting you've said about leading by example. Just thinking about, you know, my street, the people complained when the councils had less money, and they stopped cleaning, they stopped gritting the streets in the winter, and they were like, oh, this is terrible, and they ended up putting the grit box in. So I just went out and I gritted the street, and then I, you know, a few days later I gritted the street again, and then gradually people started gritting the street as well. And I didn't say anything to anybody, I just gritted the street, you know. And I think that
Yes.
if you just do it, people will.
Yes.
Gradually,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
I think we've got actually quite a good community, but that's really brilliant. Right, thanks for that, Varun. That's the first 4. So what we'll do is we'll come back and do the second 4 as another time.